The ship landed with a gentle vibration on the wide metal platform of Station 12, a research outpost positioned on the edge of Valari territory. The sky above was soft green, covered with layers of floating mist, and the air shimmered with the energy of the nearby sun. Mark stepped out of the shuttle, carrying only a small case in his hand and the usual sense of quiet curiosity in his eyes. He had never been to this side of the galaxy before, never spoken to a Valari, and never thought he would be the kind of person chosen for such a strange diplomatic post. Yet here he was. The Valari were unlike any other species known to humans. They spoke very little and expressed emotion not with words or sounds, but through the colors and patterns that moved across their skin. Most humans found it confusing, even unsettling. Their faces stayed blank and still, but their bodies would glow with shifting hues that meant things like happiness, sorrow, amusement, shame, even love. Interpreting these shades and tones was considered impossible for outsiders. But the Valari had allowed limited contact with Earth scientists and diplomats, and Mark had volunteered for a technical position as a systems technician in the station's archive wing. Mark liked things that didn't talk too much. Machines were his world. They responded to input, followed patterns, and made sense. His last post had been a lonely one, maintaining communication systems on an asteroid base. There were no colors on machines, only circuits and code. But something about the mystery of Valari skin patterns had drawn him in. He wanted to see what no one had understood yet. He wanted to watch their colors shift and wonder what they meant. Archive Wing was located deep within the station, far from the busy human quarters. The rooms were cool and lit with soft blue lights. Long shelves of ancient Valari crystals hummed quietly, each one storing information in ways that were still poorly understood. That was where he first saw her. She was standing near the central memory pillar, reading from a long translucent panel that hovered in the air in front of her. Her skin was a smooth silver tone like glass underwater. Her eyes were large and still. She didn't turn when he walked in, but he noticed her movements pause for just a second, then continue with careful grace. She was a Valari record keeper, a role considered sacred among her people. He had read about them in brief orientation files. They rarely interacted with outsiders. He introduced himself softly, said he was assigned to check the signal integrity on the pillar, but she said nothing in return. Instead, she stepped aside, giving him space to work. He began running diagnostics quietly, not wanting to disturb her presence. Yet something in the air felt different, not cold, not hostile, just delicate, like walking through a dream and not wanting to wake it. As he worked, he caught a glimpse of her from the side and froze for a moment. The silver of her skin was not still anymore, it was shifting. A soft lavender tint pulsed near her neck, barely noticeable unless one was looking closely. Mark blinked, thought perhaps it was a trick of the lights, but then it happened again, a slow, gentle wave of color flowing outward like breath. He didn't say anything about it. He finished his checks, thanked her for the space, and left the room quietly. But his mind stayed back in that moment. He had seen something rare, perhaps even impossible. A Valari had changed color in his presence, and no alarm, no irritation, just a gentle, soft shade of emotion he couldn't name. Over the next few days, Mark returned to the archive wing again and again, always with an excuse. A software update, a recalibration, a backup routine. Each time the Valari woman was there, always calm, always silent. But the color returned each time and changed a little more each visit. He saw a faint blue once, then a golden flicker along her arms. The colors never spread far, always subtle, always restrained. Yet they were there, and they were real. He tried to talk to her once, asked her if the crystal memory storage had ever shown behavior changes during solar storms. She nodded and replied in a soft, even tone that the crystals were shielded. Then she said nothing else. But as she turned away, her skin showed a soft ripple of pink. Mark began to keep a private record of the colors and the times they appeared. He created a small notebook filled with sketches and notes like a scientist watching a rare butterfly unfold its wings. But it wasn't just science anymore. He felt something strange growing inside him, something calm and warm, something he hadn't felt in years, had no name he could pronounce, but her presence had become the most important part of his day. He started timing his routines to match. When she would be present, he adjusted his schedule to linger in the archives longer than necessary. She never told him to leave and never asked why he came one evening he entered the archive room late. The lights were dimmer than usual and the air cooler. She was sitting cross-legged near a crystal display, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes half closed. Mark hesitated at the door, wondering if he should turn back, but then she looked at him. Her skin glowed with a deep rose color one he hadn't seen before, rich and full and undeniably alive. She didn't speak. Neither did he. But in that quiet room, surrounded by the memory of stars and stories he didn't understand, he felt something pass between them. Sat on the floor across from her, not touching, not speaking, just existing in the same moment. And her colors continued to move, slow, graceful, warm, as if his presence had unlocked a language long forgotten. From the hallway, a passing Valari elder stopped and glanced through the doorway. Their eyes narrowed, not in anger but concern. They saw the color on her skin, and they understood something Mark could not. A human had triggered a bond. A human had made her shimmer. The moment was small, yet the meaning was vast. And so the story had begun, not with explosions, not with war, not with politics, but with quiet rooms, silent eyes, and skin that spoke without sound. Mark's visits to the archive wing became more than routine. They became a quiet habit, a rhythm he could not ignore. Each day brought a small excuse, maybe a calibration check, maybe a temperature reading, maybe a simple scan for dust interference on the crystals. The truth was, he no longer cared about the reasons, because what truly pulled him, there was something he could not explain, something he did not fully understand. The Valari woman now noticed his arrival each time. She no longer turned away when he entered. Instead, she acknowledged him with a brief glance and a faint shimmer along her arms. Sometimes a golden haze, sometimes a pale rose, sometimes a pattern like flowing water that seemed to ripple with emotion he could feel, but not name. She never spoke more than a few words, yet her presence was louder than language. The space around her always felt alive, as if the air held a pulse that followed her breathing. Her movements were still graceful and careful, but they were no longer cold or distant. When she shifted the crystals or passed him a data panel, her fingers lingered for just a second longer than before. Mark began to study not just the machines, but her, the way her colors changed when he smiled, the way they paused when he looked confused, the way her glow softened when they stood side by side. It was not a pattern he could explain with numbers or charts. It was something felt, not measured. He would return to his quarters and write in his notebook, recording what he saw, trying to describe shades that had no name, like the violet haze that reminded him of forgotten music, or the green flame that danced over her skin when they accidentally touched hands. Near the archive controls, others began to notice the change. The human staff who worked nearby started making comments in low voices, saying that Mark was spending too much time in the alien wing, saying that maybe the Valari woman was influencing him, saying that perhaps it was not healthy to form habits around beings so different from themselves. The Valari noticed too. Their expressions never changed, but their silence deepened. They watched him with eyes that missed nothing. One of the elders passed him once in the corridor and stopped only for a moment before continuing on. The message was clear. In the quiet, the watchers were watching now. Lyra. That was the name Mark gave her in his notebook, since her real name could not be shaped by human tongue, seemed to sense the weight growing around them. She began to hesitate. More often, her skin showed less color during the day. It stayed closer to that soft silver that she wore when they first met. But when they were alone, when the room was empty, when no one passed by for hours, her colors Returned in waves. She once showed a burst of bright amber when he laughed while explaining a joke from Earth. Something about weather that made no sense to her, but his joy had made her glow. Another time when he brushed dust from her sleeve by instinct. Her entire arm lit up with a sudden blush of copper and orange, then faded slowly, as if trying to hide what had been revealed. Mark never asked her what the colors meant, because deep down he feared the answer. He feared breaking the fragile space they had built between silence and understanding. But his heart knew more than his mind wanted to admit. Something was changing inside him too, and it had nothing to do with data signals or alien protocols. Then came the warning. He returned one evening later than usual and found the archive locked. A message was displayed in soft glowing letters saying the room was temporarily closed for maintenance. That had never happened before. He waited outside for over an hour, pacing silently. When the door finally opened, it was not Lyra who stepped out but an elder Velari, their skin a firm deep blue, their eyes calm yet filled with unreadable judgment. They said nothing to Mark, only nodded slightly and walked away, but the meaning hung heavy in the air. He entered the room to find Lyra standing near the crystal pillar, her posture more rigid than usual, her skin completely still, not a single flicker of emotion. She did not meet his eyes. Asked if everything was all right, if there was something wrong with the systems, if she needed help with the diagnostics, but she only replied that everything was functioning properly, and then she turned away. It felt like a wall had risen between them, a silent, invisible wall that he could not see but could feel pressing against his chest. He stood there for a long time, not knowing what to say, then finally walked out without another word back in his quarters. Mark stared at the pages in his notebook, where colors had once danced across lines like poetry. Now they felt like fragments of something lost. Days passed slowly. He returned to the archives, but her presence was rare. When she did appear, her skin was always the same silver, no shades, no movement, no messages. He wondered if she was trying to protect him, or if she was simply told to distance herself, or if perhaps what they shared had been nothing but illusion. But one night, just before the end of his shift, he found a small data crystal left on his work table. It had no label. He placed it into the reader and saw a short, silent recording of the archive room from an angle he didn't recognize. In the center was Lyra sitting alone, her skin glowing with slow pulses of deep green and blue and violet and gold colors he had seen before, but never all at once. She was sitting still, her eyes closed, her breath slow, her skin telling a story he could not hear but could almost feel in his chest. The recording ended with her placing her hand on the crystal and whispering something too soft for the device to pick up. Mark sat there long after the screen went dark. He knew then what she was trying to say without saying either. Knew what the colors meant, and why they had stopped, and what it cost her to send that message. The Velari had rules, and the humans had fears, but something had already been born between them, something that did not need words, and now that it had been awakened, it would not fade quietly. The silence had become heavier with each passing day, not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of distance, of unspoken pain that filled the spaces where warmth once lived. Mark moved through his routines like a shadow, keeping his head down and his tasks simple, but inside his thoughts were louder than ever. Everything he touched reminded him of her, the memory of her voice, the shimmer of her colors, the way her presence had once made even the coldest parts of the station feel alive. But now the station felt hollow, even the machines seemed dull, their pulses and signals no longer interesting, no longer alive, only tasks to be completed without meaning. Had tried to speak with her again, a few times, standing at the edge of the archive room, asking questions, hoping for something more. But Lyra answered in short, polite phrases, and then moved away, her skin showing nothing at all, not even the faintest ripple of feeling. Mark knew this was not her choice. It was too sudden, too cold, too unlike her. Something had changed behind the scenes, and he could feel it pressing against him like the air before a storm, heavy and still and full of warning. Morning, while reviewing system logs in the command center, he received a notification, a message marked urgent from the human overseer. of the station. It was a formal warning labeled as a diplomatic concern, stating that his interactions with the Valari record-keeper had been noted as unusual and potentially disruptive to the cooperative agreement between species. It advised him to maintain professional boundaries and limit unnecessary visits to Valari sections. Mark read the message twice, his hands still, his eyes burning not from anger but from the slow crushing weight of knowing that others had been watching all along, and that now those silent watchers had chosen to speak. He thought about deleting the message, thought about writing back, demanding clarity, but he did nothing. Instead, he closed the screen and sat quietly, letting the words sink into his bones. He knew the humans would not be the only ones who noticed. He knew the Valari must have spoken too, perhaps not with words, but with glances, with colors, with silence. Evening, he walked the long path toward the archive, one last time, not with a plan, not with questions, but simply with the need to see her, to feel even a moment of the bond they once shared. The door was locked again, the panel glowing softly with no explanation, just closed as if the room itself had chosen to shut him out. He stood there in front of the locked door, unsure of what to do, when a soft sound behind him made him turn. A Valari elder stood there, tall and still, their skin showing a deep indigo shade, the color of warning and sorrow mixed together. They spoke not with words but with presence, stepping forward slowly and placing one hand on the wall beside the door. The gesture was gentle, yet firm, like saying, "This space is not for you anymore." Mark tried to speak, tried to ask what was happening, but the elder only looked at him with eyes that carried centuries of silence, and then turned and walked away, disappearing into the long corridor without another glance left. Alone in the quiet hallway, Mark pressed his forehead against the cold metal of the door, his breath slow and heavy. He didn't understand why something so peaceful, so quiet, so meaningful, had become something to fear inside. The archive room beyond that door, Lyra sat alone, surrounded by the glowing crystals, her skin drained of color, locked in what the Valari called the glass phase, a state of inner stillness where emotions are buried so deeply that even the skin forgets how to speak. She had not chosen this willingly, but she had accepted it the way Valari are taught to accept the weight of silence as a form of protection. Her heart was loud inside her chest, but her skin refused to answer. It refused to betray her feelings again, because now her feelings were no longer private. Now they were danger. She remembered Mark's voice, the way it had once filled the empty spaces in the archive room with something light and human and unexpected. She remembered the way her skin had reacted without her permission, and how it had felt not like a mistake, but like waking up from a long sleep. She remembered how the elders had looked at her, not with anger, but with quiet concern, as if she had become something unknown, as if she had crossed an invisible line, drawn centuries ago to protect the Valari from something they no longer named. When the humans came to speak with her, they brought calm words and soft threats. They said Mark had caused a shift. They said the bond forming between her and the human technician was unadvised and dangerous. They said that she must consider the balance between their worlds, and how a single shimmer of skin could ripple far beyond what either of them understood. She listened without speaking, her skin still, her eyes low, her breath even. She accepted their instructions and followed the ritual of isolation. She entered the phase of silence, and she waited for time to pass, but her thoughts did not sleep. Mark did not wait for permission. He never had. He moved through the maintenance tunnels beneath the archive wing, using codes and maps he had memorized over weeks of silent observation. He knew the system better than most, and he knew there was a forgotten door near the back of the chamber where the original Valari observatory used to stand, now sealed but not broken. He reached it just before night, his hands trembling as he opened the hatch and stepped into the cool, dim light of the old observatory. A place untouched by protocol or surveillance. She was there, sitting near the center of the circular room, surrounded by soft starlight pouring through the glass ceiling above. Her posture was still, but her eyes were open and filled with something he had not seen in days. When she saw him, her breath caught for just a second, and then her skin flickered not brightly, not loudly, but with a soft violet glow. A whisper of everything she had locked away. Mark did not speak right away, he simply crossed the room and sat near her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to share the air and the silence. Told her he had seen the message on the crystal, and he understood. Now that her colors were not accidents, that her silence was not rejection, that her stillness was not peace. She looked at him for a long time, and then spoke only once, saying that her people believed. Skin spoke truth more deeply than words, and that when it changed without control, it meant the soul had recognized something it could not deny, and now they were both marked by feeling, by connection, by something that no protocol could contain. They stayed in the observatory for hours, not needing plans, not needing permission, only needing the moment where truth could live without fear. Outside, the world was preparing to intervene, but inside that quiet dome surrounded by stars, they were already far beyond the reach of silence. Observatory had once been a place of vision where the Valari studied the stars in silence, trying to understand the language of the universe before they even spoke with other species. Now it had become something else, a hidden space, where two different souls breathed in the same rhythm without needing permission from their worlds. Mark returned there every night after the corridors emptied and the lights dimmed, slipping past locked gates and cameras that only saw what they were told to see. Lyra waited for him, each time seated in the same quiet place beneath the round ceiling of glass that held back the endless sky. Her skin no longer silver, her silence no longer heavy. Now it glowed with deep hues of violet and soft gold and shimmering blue, each color moving slowly as if painting music across her body. Her voice remained soft, her words few, but her presence spoke more than he had ever heard from anyone. Mark brought food and water, simple tools, a portable heater when the room grew cold. He adjusted the settings of nearby systems to keep the observatory unnoticed. A flicker of power here, a shadow in the logs there, all without alerting the control rooms. His hands worked from habit, his mind focused only on keeping this one space untouched by the rules that waited outside. They talked sometimes not about escape, not about guilt, not about the warnings that would surely come. They talked about the stars, about memory, about the strange way time slowed when they were together. He asked her once if the Valari believed in love the way humans did, and she looked at him for a long time before answering, not with words, but with a single slow bloom of color across her skin, the deepest shade of rose he had ever seen, mixed with soft silver like moonlight, touching warm water. It was that moment when he knew he would not walk away from her, no matter what came. But they both knew something was coming. The walls of silence were beginning to crack. The humans were checking the logs more closely. The Valari elders were holding private meetings, and the staff were whispering rumors of a violation of protocol, a risk to the treaty, something about emotional contamination or cultural dishonor. No one said their names aloud, but everyone knew. Then, one evening as Mark returned to the observatory, he found a message waiting for him, not on the official systems but scratched into the dust beside the entrance, written in the Valari script, but simple enough for him to read. It said, "They are coming for her, and they will take her away." He rushed into the room, breath heavy, heart burning, but she was already standing ready, her skin calm and glowing with quiet resolve. She had known this moment would come, had seen it in the slow shifting of the others, in the way the archive had changed, in the way her own people had stopped looking at her like one of their own. She told Mark that they would take her to the inner chambers of her kind, a place where the outside world could not reach her, where the emotional patterns could be cleansed through ritual and silence and solitude. And once that began, there would be no return, no memories, no color, no connection. Mark listened with a storm growing inside him, the kind he had never felt before, not on Earth, not in space, not in any machine room or control panel. This was not a problem he could fix with tools or wires. This was a choice, a line drawn in the air between what was allowed and what was right. He told her he would not let them take her, not like that, not into silence, not into forgetting. But she only looked at him with soft eyes, and said that running would change nothing unless they faced what was true in front of everyone. So they made a choice not to flee, not to hide, not to wait for silence to swallow them again. They walked together out of the observatory hand in hand, without fear, without shame, through the long empty corridors of the station, past cameras and scanners and silent watchers who froze at the sight of them. The alert triggered before they reached the central atrium. Alarms began to pulse, lights shifted to red security, drones hovered near the ceiling, and voices shouted over intercoms, telling them to stop, to surrender, to separate. But they did not stop. The Velari elders arrived before the human command did. Their skin dark with warning and grief, standing in the wide circle of the main hall where decisions were made and secrets were buried. Lyra stepped forward and stood in the center while Mark stood beside her without moving. She raised her arms and let her skin speak. Color poured from her in waves, slow and steady, not flashing, not angry, just true. Her body became a living story of emotion, told in light and movement, soft gold for warmth, deep blue for sorrow, gentle green for hope, vibrant pink for memory, each one flowing into the next, painting the silence with meaning. Elders did not speak at first. Their skin remained still, but their eyes watched without blinking, as if they were seeing something long forgotten, a language buried beneath law and history. Then came the human officials, speaking in sharp, clear voices, saying that this bond had gone too far, that the treaty did not permit this kind of attachment, that a technician and a cultural guardian had no right to form personal ties, that such closeness could threaten the delicate peace between species. Mark stepped forward, then not with anger, but with calm truth in his eyes. He said he did not come to break rules or treaties. He came to do his job, and in doing it, he found something rare, something real. And if the rules did not allow that, then perhaps the rules were afraid of what they could not understand. Hall fell into silence again, not empty silence, but full of weight and watching and wonder. A small sound broke it, a soft gasp from the far side of the room. Of the Velari child standing near her parent had begun to shimmer, her skin glowing with a mirror of Lyra's colors, not exact, but close enough to mean one thing: the message had been received and something inside her had answered. The elders saw it, and one of them stepped forward, slowly placing a hand on the child's shoulder, looking once at Lyra, then at Mark, then back at the room around them, and then they spoke, not with judgment, but with a question: has the time come to let the old colors speak again? No one replied, but no one stopped them either. Mark and Lyra stood together in that moment, not victorious, not safe, but seen, and that was enough for now. The central hall remained quiet long after the voices had stopped, as if the air itself needed time to understand what had just unfolded. The humans who had come with orders stood without speaking, their screens still glowing in their hands. The Velari elders watched with unreadable faces, their skin unmoving, but their silence no longer cold. Now it was filled with thought, with history, with the weight of change. Mark and Lyra still stood side by side beneath the tall ceiling of light, their hands still closed, their shoulders still touching, not out of defiance, but out of something far older than rules, a bond that needed no explanation, not to them, not anymore. The Velari child, whose skin had shimmered, stood with wide eyes, unsure of what she had done, only knowing that something inside her had moved when she saw Lyra speak without words, and something inside her had answered without fear. The elder who had spoken first stepped forward again, slowly, with the calm pace of someone carrying centuries in their steps. They looked at Lyra, not as a rule breaker, not as a danger, but as a mirror of something lost and found. All at once their skin shifted slowly into a deep indigo, laced with soft spirals of silver, the pattern of memory long preserved. They said the Velari had once spoken like this, openly, with their skin and their hearts. Long before the fear of war, long before the treaties with other worlds, long before the silence became law, they said perhaps the humans had done what the Velari could. Not they had reminded them of the voice they once carried in light and feeling. No more guards stepped forward, no more orders were shouted, no more barriers were raised, The humans lowered their devices. The Velari elders stepped back and gave space, not to punish but to witness what would come next. Lyra stepped into the center again, her body calm, her colors steady, and she began to move slowly in a circle around the hall, her skin telling a story with no words. Needed a story of stillness, broken of a connection born where none was expected, of fear met with courage, of silence that chose to speak. Again her path ended beside Mark, and then she turned to the crowd and simply held out her hand. Not to ask, not to demand, just to offer. Mark took it. That simple act was more than enough for those watching, for the elders, for the commanders, for the children, for the quiet ones, who had always wondered if connection between worlds could mean more than contracts and silence. In the days that followed, something began to change, not in fire, not in chaos, but in slow movements, in soft gestures. A meeting was called, not to judge, but to understand. The council chambers filled not with law, but with curiosity. The topic was not punishment, but possibility. The Velari proposed something new, a program, not of separation, but of sharing, one that would allow a few humans and Velari to study empathy together, not as threat, but as bridge, not behind walls, but in open spaces where skin could speak and hearts could listen. Mark and Lyra were named the first to lead it, not as leaders of their kind, but as living proof of what could grow in the quiet places between fear and trust. They were not given medals or parades, but something better, the freedom to walk side by side without shadows. The archive wing was reopened, but now with open doors and fewer guards. Humans and Velari passed through together, some still cautious, some still silent, but all watching, all wondering. The observatory became a place of light again, repaired and cleaned, with its roof cleared for stargazing. Once more Velari children were brought to sit beneath the stars and listen, not just to data and history, but to feelings, stories told through the colors of those who remembered how to feel out loud. Mark and Lyra returned there, often, sometimes to teach, sometimes just to sit hand in hand under the twin moons, with no words between them and none needed. Her skin still shimmered when he laughed, and his breath still caught when her colors bloomed in shades he had never seen before. He had come as a technician, a quiet man who preferred machines to people, and she had been a keeper of silence, a guardian of memory, locked behind tradition. But somehow in the spaces between protocol and loneliness, between caution and chance, they had found something real, something neither culture had planned for, something no treaty could predict. The humans changed slowly, because humans always need time. But the stories of the observatory and the girl who shimmered began to spread, not just as data, but as something close to legend. Velari changed too, in softer ways, allowing children to ask questions about the old meanings of color, letting them explore the language of skin, once hidden and now returned. No one declared victory. There was no need, because the story had ended, not in war, not in exile, but in understanding, and that was more than enough. Lyra's colors still shifted every time she saw him, even years later, and Mark still watched her skin with awe, not because he needed to study it anymore, but because it reminded him of the moment everything had begun, the first time he had seen her shimmer, and the first time he realized that sometimes what a universe hides in silence is not danger, but beauty waiting to be noticed. And now it had been noticed, now it had been named, not by law or science, but by two hearts who refused to forget what they had seen in each other, and this time no one would make them forget again. The end.